From 2007 and persisting to this day, the Assassin's Creed series has been one of highs and lows. However, throughout the many controversies, reimaginings, and nonsensical modern-day storylines, Ubisoft's flagship IP has seen 14 mainline entries, a long-form ambitious storyline spanning multiple types of media, and countless spin-off games and DLC. From a personal perspective, Assassin's Creed has been my video game junk food for more than half a decade. I first played Assassin's Creed 2 back in 2019, and it took me a long time to finally play all of the games in the series, even dipping my toes into some of the more famous spin-offs. With the release of Assassin's Creed Shadows, I wanted to look back at the franchise as a whole and examine each one and rank them from worst to best. A bit of background on me and what this video is going to be. First of all, as is the case with any video conveying an opinion, this is merely, well, my opinion. We will disagree on certain things. There are going to be hot takes said in this video that you will want to scream at me for, and that's awesome! That's the beauty of subjective art, and I would love to discuss all of the ways we differ in the comments so long as you do so constructively. Second, I did not grow up with Assassin's Creed, and thus my perspective is not weighed in on what an Assassin's Creed game should be. You're gonna see me approach these games based on their intrinsic quality and not based on how close or far it is from the original Assassin's Creed formula. Third, just to get it out of the way, we are not going to be discussing DLCs in any form or fashion, as there are a lot of DLCs that I have not played and thus would be a disingenuous way to assign praise or condemnation. Fourth, I've only played each of these games once, most of them a number of years ago, and if I had unlimited money and time then I would replay all of them to fully crystallize my opinions, but I'm a broke 23-year-old working a full-time job and am picking myself up from my shoelaces, so I'm sorry, but that's just not happening. Finally, we are going to be discussing the few spin-offs that I have played. Just to keep everyone on the same playing field, the full list of games I'm going to be discussing is Assassin's Creed, Assassin's Creed 2, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Assassin's Creed Revelations, Assassin's Creed 3, Assassin's Creed Liberation, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, Assassin's Creed Rogue, Assassin's Creed Unity, Assassin's Creed Syndicate, the Assassin's Creed Chronicles Trilogy, Assassin's Creed Origins, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Assassin's Creed Mirage, and Assassin's Creed Shadows. With all the preamble finally out of the way, let's put on our Assassin's outfits, unsheath our hidden blades, and collect all those goddamn feathers as we begin. I originally planned on giving each of the Chronicles games their own spots on this list, but after refreshing myself on the individual games and watching the most recent ranking video from the exceptional Assassin's Creed channel The Hidden Ones, it made a lot more sense to combine them, as I would just be repeating myself for most of it. So shout out to The Hidden Ones for making this decision for me, and check out their channel cause it's great. Anyways, the Chronicles series of spin-offs, the red-headed stepchildren of the Assassin's Creed franchise. The Chronicles trilogy is by far the most unique of the bunch, opting for a 2.5D stealth-focused adventure, and they unfortunately fall flat in almost every regard. The gameplay is unexciting, the individual stories never hooked me, and the whole time I desperately wish that these gorgeous locations, art styles, and time periods were done justice in proper entries. If I were to recommend any of them, it would undoubtedly be China, as Xiao Zhen's ties to Ezio found me more engaged with their character. I also found the gameplay in China to be far superior to the others, feeling the closest to a traditional Assassin's Creed game smushed into this ill-fitting box. India is probably the worst of the bunch, with the weakest story and a general unmemorable air to it. Russia would exist in the middle of both of these quality-wise, and the fucking lawnmower men are outside my house again! Holy shit! Russia would exist in the middle of these two quality-wise, with the most striking visual style and an alright story, but the lack of any real gameplay innovation stops it from being better than China. The collection is still to this day the only Assassin's Creed game for which I have not platinumed, and that will most likely stay that way. Only true enthusiasts of the franchise should touch this one, as there's almost nothing that would warrant me going back to it. Liberation is such a frustrating game. On one hand, I want to love this title more than I do. Its lively recreation of the Southern Bayou in New Orleans is incredibly well done, and it's remarkably well put together and fairly in line with its contemporaries given its original release on the PS Vita. This fact only makes me more disappointed in the Chronicles games because we could have had this, a more traditional Assassin's Creed entry set in China, India, and Russia on the PS Vita, if they didn't make the strange choice to have the Chronicles games be in 2.5D. Fuck! But I digress. Liberation has a lot going for it, and this is one of those games where if I had my PS Vita on me and I was waiting in line at the doctor's office or I was on my lunch break, hell yeah, I'd put some time into it and I'd probably enjoy myself. But with the HD re-release on modern consoles and the sheer obsoleteness of the Vita, this is how most people, myself included, will play Liberation. Through this console re-release, it's unfortunately put on an even playing field with its peers. Looking at it through that lens, it falls short in too many categories for me to put it anywhere other than the worst of the traditional series. It tries new things like the disguise system, which can see you dress up as an assassin, a slave, or as a quote-unquote lady, with all their positives and negatives. The system is awesome in concept, but falls woefully short in execution, as none of the missions give you a whole lot of choice in the matter, and even still, with how the disguises are built, you would choose the assassin outfit every single time. The assassin outfit is far too versatile and useful to make its only downside, enemies always being on alert of you, matter in the slightest. The story is so uneventful and forgettable that I don't remember a single character's name besides from Evelyn and Connor. I think I remember that your stepmother is evil or something like that, but gun to mine in my family's heads, I could not tell you what her name is. As I said, I wish I liked it more because it's a fairly competent handheld title, but it's no longer handheld and is forced to be put alongside the mainline games, and thus, it ranks at 15. Assassin's Creed Rogue is a title that has always been cast aside and forgotten about. Released in 2014 on the same day as its PS4 brother, Unity, Rogue was the swan song for the 7th generation of consoles and is largely forgotten by the masses. Do I think that reputation is warranted given the merits of the game itself? Yes and no. I actually think Rogue is a must-play for Assassin's Creed fans, as this is the only time where the main protagonist is a Templar. With that unique hook, Rogue is able to dissect the Assassin-Templar philosophy in ways that we hadn't seen before, and that whole dichotomy is one of my favorite aspects of the Assassin's Creed franchise. Does this discussion sacrifice a bit of believability by making the assassins seem overly harsh and the Templars overly nice? Yeah, a bit, but I don't think you can make this story work without having to make that sacrifice. While we're on the topic of positives, the framework for Rogue is almost one-to-one the same as Black Flag. You won't be seeing Black Flag on this list for quite a while, so transferring a lot of the bare necessities from it is mostly a good thing, but unfortunately, that's a double-edged sword, as it doesn't innovate in the slightest and feels more like an expansion to Black Flag than an actual standalone title. It copy and pasted nearly everything about it, and that's also including the god-awful Abstergo B-plot, which is somehow even less interesting here than in Black Flag. Rogue also has the unfortunate displeasure of being my least favorite world to explore out of all of these games, which is something that the Assassin's Creed franchise is known for consistently excelling at. The North Atlantic is barren and uninteresting, with the only worthwhile sections of the map being carryovers from Assassin's Creed 3. The ship combat just kinda exists, the combat and stealth just kinda exists, everything about Assassin's Creed Rogue just kind of exists. It's the most boring entry by far, as beyond its premise, it does nothing to justify its existence. It stands as little more than a cash grab made to squeeze money at the PS3 generation before it finally croaked. How much worth should you place on a first entry? Should you praise it for being the trailblazer, the one that set everything in motion, the one that started it all? Should Iron Man be considered the best MCU movie because of the dynasty that succeeds it? Or should you take its values as what they are and compare them accordingly? This is where the Assassin's Creed purists are going to get a little upset, and that's fine, but I didn't play the original Assassin's Creed until way later than most of this list. This undeniably clouds my judgment, as I wasn't around in its heyday and I didn't see how this one laid the foundation for what came after. However, I can only speak on these games from my point of view. That being said, the first Assassin's Creed is kind of rough. It hasn't aged all that well in a lot of ways, but the most evident in my opinion is in its mission design. The same 4 to 5 missions are reused over and over again for each target, and it wears thin almost immediately. None of them are all that engaging in and of themselves, and the basic traversal and stealth don't help matters. Altair is a 2x4 plank of wood throughout the whole game, but his arc is a little interesting, so it's not a total loss. But the most I can say for the original is that it is the original. I give it a lot of credit for being the one to start this whole shindig. The world building is impeccable, and the Abstergo sections are shockingly not terrible. It's insane how much of the lore is already built out and how well it all fits together. Al-Mualim as an antagonist is the perfect foil for Altair in that he's actually interesting. And I guess because his beliefs mirror that of Altair, but mostly because he's actually interesting. I don't know, this one is so hard for me to narrow my opinions on. A replay could see this rise a couple of ranks or tank below even Liberation, but I and everyone else has to give it credit for the absolute dynasty it started and how well it established the foundation for what would come. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is undoubtedly the most controversial entry of this incredibly controversial franchise. Some love it for the Odyssey that is its namesake, the character of Cassandra and her story, and the world of Greece. Others damn it to hell for its RPG mechanics, overstuffed world, and narrative that is almost completely disconnected from the other games. If you couldn't tell by its placement, I more identify with the latter, but I don't hate Odyssey by any means. In fact, I share a lot of the positives that many praise it for. Greece is gorgeous, the graphics are pristine, and Cassandra is a wonderful protagonist. She's witty, tough, and the relationship she has with her family carries a lot of the more humdrum parts of the game. She's played to near perfection to the point where I can't see how anybody can prefer Alexios as the protagonist, but to each their own. And I do give a bit of credit for the sheer ambition of what they were going for here. It might be misguided and scatterbrained ambition, but it's ambition nonetheless. The big thing about Odyssey that earned its spot all the way at 12 is that the world is just so goddamn big. It is so big and so barren with worthwhile content that actually spending time in Greece is a huge bore. Odyssey is a very fitting subtitle for this one, as its scope is the primary draw here, and if it fails at that, then there isn't much to come back to. Everything from the Cult of Kosmos to the Mercenaries are added to inflate the runtime with minimal worthwhile payoff. The story is decent, but as I said, it is carried by Cassandra. The characters Cassandra surrounds herself with are almost always overshadowed by her. Aside from Phoebe, we love Phoebe in this house, and the lack of any real connective tissue to the series by and large makes me think that skipping Odyssey might be the ideal way to play, as you won't really be missing much. The combat could have facilitated the epic scope and brutality of the era, but it doesn't commit. Instead, it makes every enemy a damage sponge that takes 200,000 damage with a single ability, and they still have 90% of their health left. Origins left Ubisoft confident in their new RPG formula, and so they expanded upon everything Origins did without showing restraint where necessary. I think if they were to have narrowed the scope and gave some of these questlines more satisfying endings, then I could see it being one of my favorites. As it is, however, I left Odyssey thinking it's the one game with the most potential that fell the most short. Mirage was always going to have an unfair uphill battle. After Valhalla left many fans salivating for a more traditional Assassin's Creed experience, Mirage came along, and instead of fully committing to the old or to the new, it takes one step in both worlds, leaving it feeling unambitious and lacking in identity. It restores a parkour-oriented city, smaller scope, and social stealth elements from the older games, but keeps the combat and traditional stealth of the newer games. These two parts don't really work together, though the highlights of Mirage are unquestionably the elements they bring from the past. It felt good to bribe musicians again and assassinate enemies without a trace. The parkour left a lot to be desired once you get into the weeds with it, but the fundamentals are still there and play as good as ever. Baghdad as a city is densely populated and layered, making for the best city to parkour in since Paris from Unity all the way back in 2014. It's gorgeous, and evokes feelings of sprinting through Constantinople and Venice in the Ezio trilogy. At the end of the day though, that's what this game is. A lazy reminder of better times that's unwilling to do more. Nowhere is that more evident than in the story. Valhalla left the modern day storyline in an interesting place that Mirage could have easily elaborated upon, but it pulls back as soon as things dare to get interesting. Basim is just one of a long list of protagonists, and the supporting characters as well as the villains don't add much to the overall package. It's deeply forgettable, but ultimately harmless. It's never a bad time, but Mirage might be the most middle-of-the-road entry in the series. It's been habitually trained to be as neutral as possible, and you know what they say, if you appeal to everyone, you appeal to no one. I have a phrase to describe the reception to games like Assassin's Creed Unity. I like to call it the paradox of retrospection. It's when a product initially releases and the reception is underwhelming due to various factors. Over time, as more people give it a chance, they find that it's not as bad as everyone said it was. Therefore, public perception does a 180, and now everybody praises it. Almost overwhelmingly so. This happens a lot with games like Batman Arkham Origins, Days Gone, and of course Assassin's Creed Unity. People say they're underrated, but that sentiment is so widespread and accepted that they almost become overrated. Thus, the paradox of retrospection. The retroactive consensus of them has shifted almost too much into the positive, where I find myself more often than not falling between the initial response and the new response. Unity is not nearly as bad as the initial reviews we have you believe, but it's far from one of the best Assassin's Creed games in my opinion. Unity's flowers are most often given on account of its parkour and representation of Paris. The parkour is the most fluid and complex yet, and works in perfect harmony with the still gorgeous Paris. The French Revolution is the perfect backdrop to bolster every facet of the setting. Both Paris and the parkour stand out so much that I totally understand why the lesser aspects of Unity are forgotten in the cultural zeitgeist. It's because of the good that Unity does that I'm all the more disappointed in its story, combat, and multiplayer integration. I love the premise of a Romeo and Juliet love story in the context of the Assassins and Templars, but similarly to Rogue, it fails to keep my attention beyond the premise. Arno and Elise have great chemistry, and there are faint glimmers of what could have been an outstanding story in here, but it wasn't meant to be, as it's mired in boring villains and the main duo don't have enough screen time to get invested in their personal stakes. The combat in Unity is the biggest departure in the series up until this point, trading in the flashy Arkham combat style for a more strategic and slower paced affair. It's an endeavor that doesn't fully pay off, as it never really clicked with me. Could that be an operator error? Absolutely, but this was my experience with it nonetheless. Finally, Unity tried to go all out with its biggest departure yet, a full-on co-op experience that was envisioned to be seamless and fun. It's a neat novelty, and I don't think this experiment was a mistake, but the servers are still rough, even a decade after most of the launch problems were fixed. The missions inside this multiplayer mode require such a coordinated team that it feels incredible when you're able to pull it off, but feels awful when one bad move from an ally corrupts it entirely. I had a whole lot to say about Unity because it is absolutely a game that deserves to be re-examined. It does a whole hell of a lot so good that if things like the world and parkour are what you value most, it's hard to disagree that it's a misunderstood gem, but that's not all that Unity is. It's also a half-baked story, misguided combat, and a multiplayer hook that isn't catching any fish. It is the paradox of retrospection in full effect. Syndicate is, complicated. It's one of the more forgotten entries, which is both expected and unfortunate. Syndicate came at the franchise's lowest moment after the disastrous launch of Unity and the underwhelming release of Rogue. Because of this, it often flows under the radar. When I first played through Syndicate, I held it in much higher regard, but as time passes, it falls lower and lower. Like Unity's multiplayer focus, I admire Syndicate's hook of having two unique protagonists. Jacob and Evie, while far from the most interesting or likable main characters in the franchise, still have enough differences in gameplay to actually think ahead and be able to plan your approach for each character. I didn't mention this in the Unity entry, but the game introduced more Hitman-esque assassination rooms, and Syndicate takes that concept and runs with it. Each of these assassination rooms have multiple ways of entry, multiple unique assassination opportunities, and a litany of enemies in your way that could compromise the whole plan. These are without a doubt the highlights of the whole game, and are infrequent enough to be special and fresh every time. As always, the cities are a big standout, and Industrial Revolution era London is one of my personal favorites. I don't love the grappling hook, but I never thought it weighed down the moment-to-moment gameplay as much as everyone else does. It does, however, start a trend that would de-emphasize the parkour in the series, but despite all that Syndicate does well, it falls woefully short in the story department. The paper-thin modern-day, forgettable villain, and disappointing main characters make the story one of, if not the worst in the series. The addition of the World War I epilogue is a novel addition but lacks a purpose and is completely divorced from the base game. I hate advocating for content to be cut and pushed to DLC, but I think if the World War I side story was made as DLC instead, I'd give it a lot less slack. Over time, I've come to realize just how little of the game I remember. I remember the world, the stealth, and the combat, but quite literally zero plot details. I remember the main villain has a rocking mustache, and that's about it. If it had a more memorable and worthwhile story, Syndicate could have very well risen in the rankings, potentially reaching top 5 territory, but I can't do that in good conscience when I remember so little of it. We've made it to the most recent entry on this list, Assassin's Creed Shadows. Shadows unfortunately had the weight of the world on its shoulders and was mired in, frankly, ludicrous controversy. The whole world was rooting against it, and did it defy all the odds and come out on top? It's not as simple as a yes or no answer. I think Shadows succeeds at a fundamental level, specifically in how it handles Naoe and Yasuke. Both are very different characters for very different playstyles in a way that's a lot more significant than in Syndicate. Naoe is the scalpel. She excels at enemy strongholds where stealth is preferred, as she has the movement and assassinations to back it up. Yasuke is the hammer. He is more focused on the forced combat scenarios with his hard-hitting attacks and large health pool. They're equally fun, and their different weapons allow for a multitude of different approaches to each situation. However, there does seem to be a big lean towards Naoe given how hard it is to traverse as Yasuke and how long it takes to switch to him in the main story. Needless to say, both of them work incredibly well, and so does a new mechanic called season shifting. Each season has its own pros and cons and will change throughout the course of the game. While it falls into the background, it helps to set Shadows apart from the others. Like in Valhalla, you can return to your home base and customize it to your liking. It's a lot more in-depth here, and I love a good base customization mechanic. I would legit spend an hour making it look as nice as it possibly can. I also have to give it credit for how much restraint was shown given the increasing size and length of each RPG game since Origins. Shadows is much more in line with Origins than Odyssey or Valhalla in this regard, and I have to shout that out because please, for the love of God, keep showing restraint. Anyways, now we need to talk about everything else. If you haven't been on the Assassin's Creed train in a while, Shadows won't do anything to make you hop on board again. It's all of the best and the worst of the RPG games. Japan is stunning and vast, but it's also too bloated and cumbersome to fully enjoy. Naoi and Yasuke are great, but the ending is lackluster and they're surrounded by forgettable side characters. The combat and stealth are enjoyable and customizable, but it's still a game of damage numbers and leveling. The dialogue offers choice, but no agency. It's a 40-hour experience of give and take, and I couldn't think of a better place for such a game than the dead middle of the list. And now that we've reached that point, every game from here on out I consider to be outright good. So let's continue. I think Revelations gets a bad rap. It's hard to measure up to games like Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood. When you have such a dramatic glow-up like 2 and a worthwhile continuation like Brotherhood, how do you even try to conclude this trilogy? Do you do more of the same? You could, but you may also run the risk of the ending feeling too familiar and anticlimactic. Do you make it something completely unique? Again, you could, but fans may also be disappointed that so much has changed and so little is familiar to them. Revelations leans more onto the latter, with a whole new area, new cast, and a bold decision to tie Ezio's story directly to Altair, who starred in the least acclaimed entry thus far. I think that's why people look back at Revelations less favorably than the others. Just because it's different doesn't make it bad, but it also doesn't immediately make it great. The selfish part of me wanted to see another adventure with Ezio, Da Vinci, and Claudia taking on the Borgias in Italy, but I like that Revelations puts so much importance on Ezio's ending and making him the best he could be, by finding love, finding a home, and by coming to terms with his role in the overall story. I have less flattering things to say about the modern day storyline. Subject 16 is a very interesting character, but stripping back so much of it, especially given where Brotherhood left us, it was super disappointing and felt like a filler arc for when they truly wanted to end the story in AC3. Thankfully, when we look at the gameplay for Revelations, Ezio, especially in his parkour, is better than ever. The addition of the hook blade allows for such fluid movement across the rooftops of Constantinople. It's so satisfying to scale a tall building in just a few seconds because of the hook blade. It's a mechanic I wish they stuck with because going back to Revelations just feels right, and to have that missing from subsequent entries is super disappointing. I'd say this game's biggest swings are the things that I both love it for and don't love it for. Adding a tower defense minigame was certainly a choice of all time, but Altair's inclusion into the story was great even if his sequences are the most boring gameplay wise. I also didn't really care for the catacombs section towards the end of the game, but the story still kept me involved throughout. The new cast is pretty solid, but I wish we could have gotten more from the old to truly make this an ending for the trilogy and not just for Ezio. All in all, I think Revelations could be the game to benefit the most from a replay, but as it stands now, I like Revelations a lot, but it's just not one of my favorites. Back in 2012 when Assassin's Creed 3 first came out, it was seen as the most controversial by a mile. Connor as a character was heavily criticized, the elongated introduction was seen as unnecessary, and the ending was panned for its abruptness and unsatisfying choices. Over time, AC3 has garnered a lot more favor and is definitely no longer considered the most controversial one here, and so I tend to agree with the people who generally think Assassin's Creed 3 is pretty good. At the core of the story is one of the most fleshed out conflicts between the Assassins and Templars, specifically in their difference in ideology. Haytham soars as a villain with his personal connection to Connor, his somewhat understandable motivation, and the masterfully executed bait and switch that ends the prologue. He is undoubtedly the best antagonist in the whole series, and contrasts Connor in great and not so great ways. Connor is just fine as a protagonist, his motivations are understandable, he's fun to play as, and I like his dynamic with Achilles, but he's a little too stoic and static as a character. A character like that isn't unwelcome, but I just prefer a lot of the other assassins from the other games. I was always interested in Assassin's Creed 3 the most growing up because, living in America, the idea of an Assassin's Creed game where you explore colonial America and interact with our founding fathers was something I was so attracted to. and they make the most out of it here. Boston and New York are brought to life excellently, and while the frontier is relatively barren, it allows for fluid parkour amongst the trees and also hunting, a new feature in this game that is pretty neat. There's also the homestead, which is really the first time you had a home base that you would see level up and evolve as the game progresses. Yes, I know there was technically Monte Regione and AC2, but the homestead is a lot more in line with the spirit of Ravensthorpe and the hideout from Valhalla and Shadows because of how you grow your bonds with the people you recruit. All of this along with an evolution of the combat and stealth from the previous games in AC3 sounds pretty amazing, right? Right? Okay, now time to talk about the elephant in the room. The modern day storyline is something I've only briefly mentioned in the other entries, but in Assassin's Creed 3, we have the most involved modern day story of any of the games. Each of these missions in isolation are honestly pretty great. They break up the pacing and give us some great set pieces like Desmond finding the Apple of Eden and using it to escape a skyscraper. They really ramp up the stakes here and hype up how this might be the end of Desmond's story. And then the ending happens. I honestly don't know if this ending has aged better or worse over the years. Desmond's death isn't bad because our hero has died, it's because we, like Desmond and his friends, feel betrayed. By sacrificing himself and letting Juno free into the world, I can't help but get the sense his arc was for nothing. He gives himself up, but this threat we've been fighting for the past 5 games is not only still out there, but stronger than ever. If he had died and there was a clear passing of the torch of some kind, it would sit a lot better with me, but he just kinda dies. His brain gets fried and Juno escapes. This marks the end of this arc for the modern day storyline, but since every game after 3 has done a piss poor job of building upon its ending, it feels even more pointless. I was never the biggest fan of Desmond or his storyline, I'm gonna be honest, but even I felt like this ending was a big slap in the face. That's made only worse by the fact that since then, there's been a hodgepodge of different angles and attempts to continue the modern day storyline to minimal success. Each new attempt is either random, half-baked, or all but absent. While the fault of the mediocre modern day should be placed solely on the subsequent games for failing to continue it in a satisfying manner, none of that would have happened had this ending not been so universally reviled, practically putting the final nail in the coffin for people's investment in continuing that story. Anyways, that's Assassin's Creed 3, a game that's legacy could have been so much more positive had it not been for a terrible ending. Unfortunate, but sometimes shit like this just happens. If you didn't hate me enough for this take though, you'll surely hate me for the next one, because my controversial takes so far have nothing on what I'm about to say. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is too fucking bloated. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is too fucking big. Assassin's Creed Valhalla has too much shit. I agree with all of these more than valid criticisms. However, I'm also of the belief that if Valhalla was about 10 to 15 hours shorter or smaller or whatever, it would be regarded as one of the best in the series. The biggest thing holding Valhalla back is the lack of restraint from the developers, and I talked about this in the Shadows entry. They threw everything at this game. Every single little idea they had, they integrated, and most of the ideas are great. I love the idea of exploring the Isu era with the Norse gods in Asgard. I love the idea of a massive country hopping journey of forging alliances. I love the idea of Layla sacrificing herself and passing the mantle to the unreliable narrator Basim. I love the idea of telling a story that bridges the gap between the Order of the Ancients and what we now know as the Templars. I love the idea of Desmond existing in a digital world attempting to course correct the timeline. I love all of this. 80% of each of these ideas are executed amazingly. It's that last 20% that's just too fucking much. Cut the amount of missions in each storyline by 20%. Cut the amount of time we spend in Asgard by 20%. Cut the Order of the Ancients targets by 20%. Cut the world size by 20%. Cut the amount of unnecessary treasure and annoying ass barred doors by 20%. Cut the skill tree by 20%. Okay, 30%. Okay, no, probably more like 60%. Do all of that, and the minute-to-minute experience of playing Valhalla improves tenfold. Thankfully, with Shadows showing some restraint and Ubisoft promising smaller experiences in the Assassin's Creed universe, this problem is hopefully in the rear view, but it's still one that plagues Valhalla. Aside from its scope, there's honestly very little about Valhalla I have to criticize. Most of what came before is iterated and improved upon. Gone are the long drawn-out side quests, and in their place are more natural and bite-sized world events akin to the Red Dead games. I very much prefer these over the traditional side quests, due to how much smaller in scope they are and how organically they're integrated end of the world. The combat is, in my opinion, the best of the RPG games, providing us with tons of options and giving the enemies much more manageable health pools. I also feel like Valhalla is the game that allows you to roleplay the most out of any in the series, from big things like the Viking raids to the smaller stuff like the brutal kill animations and hosting feasts at your camp. I felt the most immersed here in Valhalla than in any other game, maybe aside from Black Flag. It's because of this that Valhalla feels like the purest distillation of what Ubisoft wanted the RPG games to be. Sure, there are ways to roleplay a mercenary in Odyssey or a samurai in Shadows, but this is what I always wanted from these entries. This might be the most blasphemous take I've said thus far, but if you're gonna go all out, go all out. If you're gonna give me a role-playing game, don't give me an Assassin's Creed game with a Viking twist, give me a Viking game with an Assassin's Creed twist. Truly show me what it would be like for these kinds of people to exist in this world and how differently they would interact with it. And also, fuck, I gotta give credit for this game for actually attempting to do something with the modern day story. Every entry since 3 has struggled with it. And I'm shocked to say this, but Valhalla made me excited to see where it was going for the first time since fucking Revelations. Of course, in Mirage and Shadows, little was done to progress the story of Basim and the modern assassins, but this kind of bold choice was exactly what this storyline needed. I honestly don't know what more I could say about this game. I think it's easily the most underrated game in this series, and I wish people would give it a better chance despite the bloat being more than an understandable reason to drop it. In a lot of ways, I think Valhalla could have been the future of this franchise, but alas, Ubisoft got a Ubisoft. They went out of control, and their lack of discipline, specifically with Valhalla, is the reason why Ubisoft turned into Ubislop in the eyes of the public. But for what it's worth, I think what's here is pretty good if you're willing to give it a shot. I may have said that Valhalla is what the RPG games were always meant to be, but Origins is still easily the best of all of them, and for one major reason: focus. Every game after Origins would throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, but Ubisoft had something to prove with Origins, and like with many creators, their best works come when their back is against the wall. Origins needed to show that this franchise could take a wide swing like this and still work. They needed to revamp the combat, revamp the stealth, revamp how we interact with the world, and give us a satisfying story that makes good on the origins of the Brotherhood. At the core of it all, and the reason why this game works so well, is Bayek of Siwa, played beautifully by Abubakar Salim, and I hope I pronounced that right because he deserves so much credit for leading this game. Bayek as a character is such a deeply emotional and mature character, and Salim gave the role so much power and nuance. Credit should also be given to Alex Wilton Reagan for her performance as Aya. These two make up the backbone of the game, and it would not work without them. I have to applaud Ubisoft for succeeding at telling such a mature and complicated love story between them. They're two people who deeply love each other but are destined for different paths, and the resolution between the two feels raw and understandable. I honestly cannot give enough praise for the story. It's one of my favorites in this series, even if the villains aren't too exciting. Speaking of some of my favorites of the series, Egypt in Origins is just gorgeous. It's one of my favorite locations in the entire series as well. There's a reason why Ubisoft created the Discovery Tour mode for this game, because even just looking at it from afar elicits a feeling of wonder and awe. Interacting with the world adds a whole other layer. I will never get tired of scaling one of the pyramids and looking down on the world beneath me. The size of the map is daunting, but it's jam-packed with a lot of goodies, and it would be worth exploring if it didn't have some of the worst level gating of all time, because fuck this game's level gating. It's bad in the other RPG games as well, but I remember it being the worst in Origins. The combat is also reinvented to be more meticulous and focused on cooldowns, and I think that works as a base for what the future games would build upon. Origins fully moved away from the social stealth that made the game so unique and transitioned into a more traditional stealth system that's more in line with modern action games. This was something that Unity and Syndicate inched away from, but Origins does away with it entirely. Gone are the crowds, the benches, and the labyrinthian city layouts, and in are silent takedowns and enemy strongholds. It works more in isolation than it does under the veil of an Assassin's Creed storyline, but as I said before, I'm criticizing these games based on their intrinsic qualities and not how much of an Assassin's Creed game it is. All this being said, Origins is the game that started morphing the series into whatever the developers wanted it to be for any given story. It's a move that has isolated a lot of fans, but not me. Origins further proves the necessity for franchises to evolve over time and allow for greater experimentation. Games like Yakuza Like a Dragon, Metroid Prime, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, God of War, and probably the most famous example, Resident Evil 4, are all games that set out to prove themselves in the midst of franchise fatigue. Games that expanded upon the foundational qualities of those franchises, and I think Origins belongs in that same camp. While it's not quite top 3 material, it's still a damn good game in the Assassin's Creed franchise. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is what you get when developers say, "Hey, that Assassin's Creed 2 did pretty well, just make more of that." In direct opposition to Origins' change everything and prove yourself mantra, Brotherhood's mantra is more like, change nothing because we don't need to prove anything. That's not a bad thing. I mean, cracking the top 3 can only mean it's a good thing, but it just goes to show you how good the foundation of AC2 was, that a game that rides almost entirely off of the coattails of it is this high up. They do add new elements on top of the fantastic foundation, like the Brotherhood that makes up the game's namesake. This mechanic sees you build and upgrade your own Brotherhood to help you complete certain tasks easier. This was a really engaging addition, and the decision to make the Brotherhood members die if they get overwhelmed adds another layer of strategy to it, instead of just an easy win button. However, aside from this, there's not much that's wholly new here, just small improvements here and there. More weapons, new combat abilities, and a larger renovation system just show that Brotherhood is kinda Assassin's Creed 2 2.0. Rome is the central location of Brotherhood, and it's one of my favorite locations in the series. It's much smaller in scale than most of the others, but it's very well balanced, featuring a wide open grassy area to use the horse in, but also features the densely constructed city area to get your parkour kicks in. Finally, and unfortunately, the story is not quite as gripping as a lot of the other entries. It's good, especially the villain Cesare Borgia, but it falls behind due to its more segmented nature and general lack of impact compared to Assassin's Creed 2. Losing It's a Me Mario and Monteriggioni sucks, but after his whole journey started with him losing his father and brothers, it just doesn't quite hit as hard. It feels like they're trying to capture lightning in a bottle twice, and the whole plot just kinda trudges along. I feel bad for Brotherhood because it was given a bad hand. It was originally a DLC that turned into a full game so that they could facilitate a yearly release cycle. It's obvious the developers had the beginning and the end of Ezio's story thought out, but the middle chapter is just more of the same, as is unfortunately the case in a lot of trilogies. I'm finding myself coming down on Brotherhood a lot more than I intended to. This should just go to show you how great the fundamentals are, that even with these criticisms, it's ranked as high as 3. Despite its lack of innovation and its tendency to play it safe, Brotherhood is still one of the best in the series. It is more of AC2 in all of the best and worst ways. Assassin's Creed 2 saved Assassin's Creed. That is just a simple fact. For that, all of the credit in the world should be given to it. After the first game didn't reach the heights Ubisoft wanted, they needed to pivot. They raised everything except for the original concept and created the baseline for not just every Assassin's Creed game, but every Ubisoft game. At the core of why AC2 works lies Ezio Auditore da Firenze, the complete polar opposite of Altair. Ezio is charismatic and sly from the start, with a motivation that is immediately clear and a tragedy that anybody can sympathize with. Seeing him start as a reckless teenager and uncovering the secrets of the Brotherhood is incredible. Not to mention his transformation into disciplined and focused assassin is an unforgettable start to his 3-game arc. That arc would go on to cement Ezio as one of the most iconic and straight up best characters in all of gaming. This reinvention stretches all the way through the gameplay as well. The mission structure is completely upended, with a much more organic flow to events that transpire instead of doing the same missions over and over again to get info like AC1. The open world, now devoid of the ungodly cold blue filter of AC1, is able to let the beauty of the world speak for itself in both how it looks and what you can do. Venice and Florence are absolutely stunning, perfectly bringing to life Renaissance-era clothing, architecture, music, art, you name it. While Damascus and Jerusalem still look great, especially for a first attempt, the Renaissance has such a distinct vibe that could have easily teetered more into fantasy than reality. They were able to realize the era with such a reverence and historical accuracy that would eventually become the series standard. Actual honest-to-god side quests are added, like the tomb quests, and even doing the fucking feathers gives you a brief but effective payoff with your mother, which is more than can be said for a lot of the stuff in the other games. The combat is expanded upon with a wider moveset and new armor and weapons to suit your playstyle and give you a sense of progression. I know it can sound like all of these additions are rather uneventful, like, oh wow, there's side missions, armor, and a better protagonist, how novel. But seeing the improvement from AC1 to AC2 makes all the difference. Like what I said about Origins, Ubisoft had their back against the wall and a need to prove themselves. And the fact that they not only improved all across the board but made everything truly great is why this game is still held in such high regard. It's aged masterfully and has earned every bit of respect and prestige it's been given. This is one that I desperately wish I had time to replay because I hope I'm not viewing it through rose-tinted glasses, but that could be a possibility. However, despite everything, despite the improvements, the legendary main character, and despite Assassin's Creed 2 being the genesis for everything that would come after, there is still one game I like just a bit more. If If you take everything that I've said about the previous games, I'm sure Black Flag ending up in the top spot isn't a shocker. Not only is it one of the most fan-favorite games in the series, perfectly blending the old and the new, but it hits on all of the major elements I spoke about previously. Like Valhalla, I think why I gravitate towards Black Flag so much is that it's not an Assassin's Creed game. It's a pirate game with an Assassin's Creed filter on it. Sure, it plays like an Assassin's Creed game, much more than Valhalla does, but everything about the Assassins is pushed to the wayside to give us a pirate adventure every child has dreamed of. It's not about the Creed nor the overarching story about the Isu era or the Templars, it's focused and uses the motifs of the series to add some spice and color to the adventure as a whole. Edward starts the game as a man and ends as a man. The Creed exists in the story to change him and set him on a better path, rather than forcing him to become all consumed by it like other protagonists had. Edward's journey is one of discovering what's important in life. He's initially drawn to a life of piracy and degeneration for fame and glory, but only finds heartbreak and tragedy. All his friends get picked off one by the lifestyle he swears by. He realizes that there's more to life than the danger and thrill of piracy and plunder. He's able to realign himself and become who he was always meant to be, a father. Ezio's story might be the most iconic, Bayek's story might have the most emotion, and Cassandra might do the most of the least, but pound for pound, Edward is still my favorite character in the series. His journey feels so personal and could not have possibly be played any better. I've neglected to mention a lot of the actors behind these characters because truth be told, they're all amazing, but Matt Ryan especially excels as Edward. He's able to play a deeply broken and lost man who's able to shelter under the booze and women, but is also able to show his true colors in some deeply moving scenes. He is the main attraction of Black Flag, alongside the general pirate fantasy. Expanding upon the ship combat from AC3, Black Flag takes what was a fairly competent side activity and fleshes it out so much, adding sea shanties, a deep progression suite, and bosses. The map this time around is covered in water, with many Caribbean islands to better channel your inner Jack Sparrow. The islands are beautiful, with special attention brought to cities like Nassau, Kingston, and Havana. Really and truly, I can't think of many things that bring Black Flag down except for, and say it with me now, the modern day story. Black Flag's first-person walking simulator is awful, straight up. While it gets into some cool concepts like Abstergo using Animus tech to spread the reach globally and other stuff like the Sages, it's just so boring, and nothing takes me out of the pirate fantasy more than the worst episode of The Office imaginable. But that's really it. It hits on everything I want an Assassin's Creed game to be while innovating and iterating upon what came before. The story is engrossing and unforgettable with the most immersive world yet. There's a reason why the first remake of the Assassin's Creed universe is this beloved modern classic. It still stands as one of the best pirate games of all time, one of my personal favorite games of all time, and easily the best Assassin's Creed game. I started this video mostly wanting to reminisce on a franchise I love, even with as many peaks and valleys as it has. But as I made this video, I kinda turned into the jaded, cynical asshole I never wanted to be. I still love this series, and will continue to play them, but I've come out the other side of this wishing I hadn't spent that $70 on Shadows when it came out, because at the end of the day, it's just more of the same. Really and truly, did spending $70 for Shadows gain me anything? Was I scared that I would get spoiled? Did I really want to play it day one, or did I just want to be there for the zeitgeist? Despite more recent entries like Origins and Valhalla being higher up on the list, I don't know if we'll ever get back to that AC2 to Black Flag era ever again, not with the identity crisis the franchise has been trapped in for years. There are several games currently in development. A couple of RPG style games, a couple smaller, more classic entries, and some remakes. I think in doing this, Ubisoft is attempting to please every corner of the fanbase, and only time will tell how well this works out for them. But unless something truly spectacular releases, unless these games remind me that this franchise still has a lot of gas in it, I'll be sitting on the sidelines, waiting for the inevitable $20 Black Friday sale within a year. And even still, I doubt Assassin's Creed will ever rise above being my video game junk food. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to check out my others and be on the lookout for my 2025 review and ranked video. Here's a brief preview of the thumbnail to get an idea of what games I'll be talking about. I have so many great ideas floating around about this video, and it's already shaping up to be my best yet, so please be excited for that. That's all I've got for you today. Please like, comment, subscribe, and play some video games.